Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining me, Dorothea, on Through an Orthodox Christian Lens. We are going into American history again and how our foreign policy has been. I'm sure most of you already know this, but since I'm an American, I do like to look over my country's history and what it's been doing. And I've mentioned this several times before, but I feel like I need to go more into this because of some prophecies about what is going to be happening in America. Why we are going to pay the highest price. So, I'm going to read just this article. It's pretty long, but I want to read certain portions of it so we are reminded of what our foreign policy has been for many, many, many decades. Like, we're saying like over 100 years or something. Very, very long time. And we get into that in just a minute. Okay, let me go to that. By the way, it's August 26, 2025. I think I forgot to say that the other day. Okay, so, I try to keep up with the date, but sometimes I forget. All right, so we're going to be talking about, imperial self-deception. There is no shortage of books, articles, and websites addressing the history of United States foreign policy. There is nevertheless within the United States a dearth of understanding and often knowledge about the subject. This is due in part to popular nationalistic history, which tends to obscure, overwrite, and sometimes whitewash actual history. The central assumption of this celebratory national history is that America has been a unique and unrivaled force for good in the world, as the historian Christian Appy described it. This assumption underpins the more muscular belief that the more power the U.S. acquires and wields in the world, the better. In other words, the U.S. should rightfully be the dominant military power in the world, given its benefic intentions and noble ideals. This flattering self-image is often buttressed by depictions of America's opponents as moral pariahs, aggressors, oppressors, enemies of freedom. Celebratory national history is deeply rooted in American culture, as may be seen in the second sentence of the war memorial below. American armed forces are typically portrayed as fighting the forces of tyranny and upholding the principles of liberty, dignity, and democracy. America's opposition to tyranny has a long ideological pedigree. In the Declaration of Independence of 1776, Patriot rebels denounced the King of Great Britain for repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. In fact, the British objective was to raise revenue from the colonies and curtail their smuggling. However, oppressive particular acts, the British government was nonetheless the most democratic in Europe, with an elected House of Commons and established rights for Englishmen that had evolved over a 600-year period. The new American government continued to build on this democratic tradition, as did the British themselves. The idea that America represented freedom as opposed to tyranny nonetheless became an ideological fixture in the new nation, invoking a virtuous and noble national identity. In its second 100 years of existence, the United States became a world power, joining the ranks of old world empires such as Great Britain. As the U.S. prepared to militarily intervene in Cuba and in the Philippines in 1898, already intervening, all the way back then, President William McKinley declared, "We intervene not for conquest, we intervene for humanity's sake, and to earn the praises of every lover of freedom the world over." Most lovers of freedom, however, denounced subsequent U.S. actions. The U.S. turned Cuba into an American protectorate and the Philippines into an American colony. Rather than fighting to uphold freedom, the U.S. fought to suppress Filipino independence at a cost of some 200,000 Filipino and 4,300 American lives. A half-century later, at the outset of the Cold War, President Harry Truman asserted that the United States must support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. Truman highlighted the tyranny of the Soviet Union and its alleged threat to Greece and Turkey, but he utterly ignored the more widespread tyranny of a European domination over most of Asia and Africa. In the case of Vietnam, the U.S. opted to side with the oppressor, aiding French efforts to reconquer the country. Truman's fateful decision in 1950 led to direct U.S. involvement in Vietnam 15 years later. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy famously proclaimed that the United States would pay any price, bear any burden, to assure the survival and success of liberty. These appealing words reminded Americans of their mythic moral identity, but they hardly guided U.S. foreign policy. During the long Cold War, 1946 to 91, the U.S. provided military and economic aid to a host of dictatorial and repressive regimes, including those in Cuba before Fidel Castro assumed power, Nicaragua, Haiti, Guatemala, El Salvador, Argentina, Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, Zaire, Somalia, South Africa, Turkey, Greece, Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, South Korea, South Vietnam, and the Philippines. Good grief. The U.S. also employed covert action to help overthrow democratically elected governments in Iran, Guatemala, and Chile. Despite propping up authoritarian governments and undermining democratic ones, U.S. leaders described their allies as the free world. In the 21st century, the rhetoric of fighting tyranny and upholding freedom has been grafted onto the war on terror declared by President George W. Bush in the wake of terrorist attacks in the U.S. on September 11, 2001. The attacks were carried out by individuals from Saudi Arabia and other friendly Arab states, but Bush directed public fears and anger toward wars against Afghanistan and Iraq, as we all know. Unable to find weapons of mass destruction or ties to al-Qaeda in Iraq, Bush reverted to the standard American rationale, promoting freedom. As long as the Middle East remains a place where freedom does not flourish, he declared on November 7, 2003, it will remain a place of stagnation, resentment, and violence ready for export. Today, the U.S. is the world's sole superpower, with the largest military budget, the most sophisticated weaponry, a network of over 700 military bases worldwide, and the capability to militarily intervene in other nations at will. Americans on the whole do not regard this overwhelming military power as a threat to other nations or global stability. British historian Niall Ferguson, or is that Neil? It looks like Neil. Niall Ferguson has commented that the United States is an empire in every sense but one, and that one sense is that it doesn't recognize itself as such. Diplomatic historian William Appleman Williams described this dominant American worldview as imperial self-deception. And of course, there's arrogance of power, and then, there's nationalists all over in different countries. And as we said and mentioned, they used an example of the Japanese. Their museum presents Japan as heroically defending itself against outside hostile forces and omits any mention of atrocities committed by Japanese troops in China and Southeast Asia. So the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington is more subtle in this regard. It pays homage to the 58,000 Americans who died in the war, but fails to account for an estimated 3 million Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians who died as a result of the U.S. war in Southeast Asia. Let's see, where was I going after this? Okay. Over the last half century, scholars associated with the progressive revisionist school of history have built a substantial library of critical studies assessing both the broad contours of U.S. foreign policy and particular wars, interventions, doctrines, and policies. They have challenged nationalist presumptions of innocence abroad, as well as realist preoccupations with the global competition for power, irrespective of the moral and legitimate use of that power. According to the diplomatic historian Thomas G. Patterson, revisionists, more than others, have spotlighted the hypocrisy and immorality and ultimate tragedy of American foreign policy. Focusing on the Cold War, for example, progressive-minded scholars pointed out U.S. officials lectured about democracy, while they and their covert operatives undercut free speech, bought foreign politicians, encouraged fixed elections, and plotted to assassinate foreign leaders. The United States pressed certain nations to honor human rights while turning eyes away from human rights violations committed by allies and trading partners. The United States fueled civil wars, often through covert actions, disrupting societies and economies, keeping the poor poor, and spawning a plethora of anti-Americanisms. The hypocrisy is seen as not merely the unintended consequences of well-intentioned policies or their poor implementation, but rather the result of an unacknowledged quest for power and dominant influence in the world, a quest that is perpetually obscured and obfuscated by the glittering generalities of American ideology and propaganda. This stuff has been going on this long and still does today. I think we need to understand that it's not better. Okay, has not changed. And why would it change when those behind the scenes in the shadows doing all these things, intel, military industrial complex, all that, they special ops groups, covert actions, nobody knows when they're going on. They're not announced. So if they do the same modus operandi. The intel have done the same thing, decade after decade after decade. You can see the fingerprints of them just on the certain things that are happening in these covert wars and all that, and everything that's happened. You can see it. It's not hard to find once you see the patterns. So anybody that thinks that this is not happening today is not living in the real world. Okay. So I'm going to get into let me see, where am I going in here? This is pretty long. I'm going to go back to this particular part. This man had something to say. He was an early critic of the Vietnam War and was Senator J. William Fulbright, who headed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and led investigations into the war. In seeking to understand the forces that motivated the U.S., he came to the conclusion that beyond the usual explanations of economic and security needs and the defense of perpetuation of great principles, the prime motivator was a desire to be bigger, better, and stronger than other nations. He labeled this the arrogance of power. America, it seems, had succumbed to the age-old folly of hubris, the Greek word for excessive pride, taking on an exaggerated sense of power and an imaginary sense of mission. One manifestation of this arrogance was that U.S. leaders believed they could and should establish governments to their liking in every corner of the world, including Vietnam. Now, I told you about all that they have the what they did. I gave you some information on all of the covert operations in South America. So here they're talking about these other ones. The antidote to hubris is humility, of course. For Fulbright, this began with open dialogue and listening to dissenting voices, on critics on the Vietnam War, etc. Okay, so some of our super patriots assume that any war in the United States fights that the United States fights is a just war, if not indeed a holy crusade. But history does not sustain their view. No reputable historian would deny that the United States has fought some wars which were unjust, unnecessary, or both. I would suggest that the War of 1812, the Civil War, and the Spanish-American War are examples of wars that were at least unnecessary. In a historical frame of reference, it seems to me logical and proper to question the wisdom of our present military involvement in Asia. And the third part involving remaking U.S. foreign policy, and the senator offered practical advice on how to move forward, much of it still relevant today. Resist the tendency to dehumanize adversaries. Limit aggressive competition with other states. Increase global cooperation. Abide by international treaties that prohibit military interventions, and expand and internationalize foreign aid for the limited transfer of wealth from rich countries to poor countries so as to address the economic roots of violence. All of this is really important. This whole thing. Everything they're saying here is very important. And what we should be doing. And, they give the ideas. Let me see here. Peace and conflict resolution studies complement progressive historical critiques by rooting such critiques in a humanistic set of values. According to the Brandeis University Peace, Conflict, and Coexistence program, the goal of peace studies is to understand reasons for war and ways of resolving conflicts without resorting to violence. The traditional concept of national security means nations each protecting their own interests and safety against those of others whose projects they find incompatible and or competitive with their own. From peace studies, we learn the concept of common security, meaning that no one is truly safe until everyone is truly safe. It is through cooperation, empathy, and compassion, rather than military might and aggressive free market practices, that common security will become possible. From the vantage point of peace studies, war is a problem to be solved, not unlike the problems of crime and disease. Examining wars in the past from a peace perspective is still an underdeveloped area of study. The paramount question in examining a particular war is whether it was necessary, whether it could have been avoided. Answering this hypothetical question requires some knowledge of alternatives at the time and some imagination as to how the belligerent parties might have resolved their differences without recourse to violence. So, war is always judged twice. First, with reference to the reasons states have for fighting. Secondly, with reference to the means they adopt. So, we go on, and again, this has always bothered me, that we constantly have to be one up. We have to beat somebody else. We have to be better. Why can't we all just get along? That old saying by, I can't think of the guy's name right now, Rodney King. Yeah, why can't we all just get along? And show some humility and some humbleness. So, okay, so there is an important part in here. Regarding the conduct of war, many historical narratives pass lightly over the suffering and trauma caused by wars. The strong preference is to sit in the president's chair and discuss grand strategies and outcomes. While this is useful and necessary, habitual and exclusive treatment of this sort has the effect of turning war into a chess game and skewing the cost-benefit analysis. A closer inspection of the deleterious effects, and after effects of wars provides for a more realistic accounting of the costs. Metaphorically speaking, this inspection should be conducted from the point of view of a neutral reporter rather than one embedded in the armed forces of one side or another. The casualties, destruction, and disruptions of life on all sides must be considered. A third contributor to the historical perspective of this website is an eclectic mix of studies that emphasize global justice and human rights. Human rights and Holocaust and genocide studies are well established in universities. Other global studies, including international, transnational, borderlands, and decolonization history, at least counteract the tendency to view historical developments through the eyes of one nation on one set of national leaders. So every nation must be studied in a framework larger than itself, and specifically that American history cannot be adequately understood unless it is incorporated into that global context. So, lots of good stuff in here. I just want to share that with you. I'm sure many of you already know this, but I want you to understand that for me, it's important that my what I want to try to say, my interest in my own country, I'm always going to hold it more accountable than any other country, because you fix your own house first, as I've said several times. And again, things like this are still going on. We meddled in the Pakistan, India conflict. We meddled in the Thailand, Cambodia conflict, or the battle they were having there for a while. In fact, an analyst said a few weeks ago on another issue with Azerbaijan and Armenia, where the two leaders from those countries showed up at the White House with Trump, and all of a sudden they're signing these papers for peace. And the analyst, I can't remember which one it was, but the usual ones I listen to, why all of a sudden did that happen out of the blue? Poof, there they were, at the White House. He didn't recall hearing this, that they were going to be coming and doing all this stuff. And he had said that he questioned this, and he said that was not Trump, that was the CIA. And the CIA and the intel have figured out how to work, just like they do with every president, behind the back of the president, and do what they want to do. It always comes out they do what they want to do, no matter if the president agrees or disagrees. So this is what happened here. This was all about what the deep state wanted to do, not what. And of course, they flattered Trump by saying, "Look, you're going to have a peace treaty, and look at that, peace president. You can win the Nobel Peace Prize." And we've heard that Trump is known to answer to flattery. He responds to flattery very well. Now we're going to get into the prophecies that we've been saying quite a lot about, is what was going to be happening in the United States. As you know, there's several videos, several elders and saints that have spoken, brought up what would happen to the United States. I'm just going to start with the Metropolitan Neophytus again, what he said, because he explains it really well. He says, the interview was broadcast by RIK, during which Reverend Metropolitan Neophytus of Morphew shared his insights on America, and he said, "Come America, the great Babylon." Went a little bit too fast. Who prophesies of it? Well, St. John, the theologian, 2,000 years ago did. Americans know this. You will pay the highest possible price. you will pay the highest possible price. When we just saw what our history has been, not saying not saying that no other country has been arrogant or has had their own deals of interventions and things like that. As we know, the British Empire did that as well. The French did that, okay? But the Americans have overtaken them, apparently, and doing worse, and we see this. And of course, that's why they're going to pay the price, the highest price, by being overwhelmed and drowned by your shores caused by various modern weapons. And he says it's the, he says, what are the Russian weapons that they have? These bombs, Poseidon and Satan, you hear the names, that will raise waves of enormous height and hit like tsunamis on the coasts of America. Which, again, I did a video on that. I looked at the Poseidon drone torpedo thing that can carry nuclear weapons, nukes in there. So, and it does cause a radiation wave, tsunamis, radiation tsunami waves. So, that's what Metropolitan Neophytus had heard in these prophecies, that it would destroy the coasts, and he's suggesting that it's Russian weapons that'll do that. We don't know for sure, but this is what they're talking about. We also know that, let's see, where is that? And then, of course, St. Paisios, he had said, everyone will abandon the Russians and go with the Jays of America. The Russians will burn them. Okay, so the Russians will burn them. And we haven't forgotten Father Elpidios, who had said Russia is called by God, ordained by God, to destroy the American state right now. It is destined to destroy the satanic state of Europe and America, which surrendered themselves to Satan. Because what is of the evil one? What are some of the characteristics of the evil one? What are they? Well, pride, greed, destruction, chaos, deception, lies, murder, killing. Did I forget any? Well, what have we been doing with our foreign policy? And let's just use Colonel McGregor's, the 3 B's, I like to say. I echo his his definitions or his ideas of what our foreign policy is. Bribing, bullying, bombing. So he says first they bribe them. If that doesn't work, they bully them. And if that doesn't work, they bomb them. People that disagree with us. Well, all those things are not necessarily good, are they? They're not really angelic or wonderful things of God. They're more in line with the enemy, the evil one. So, that would explain why these things are going to happen to us. And, it's been a long time coming. I know I live in this country and I'm going to be facing all of these things, but we deserve what we have sowed. We reap what we sow. We just pray that God will lessen what's to come. Have mercy on us. But I think we do need to be taken down several notches. And so this will happen. Like I said, Christ is going to intervene. It's going to be a purge. Last time he'll try to clean everything up. Now there was another go back in here. There was another video with another saint, and he That would be Father John Kalides. He prophesied the World War and all that, the Great War, and he had something also to say about America, and that's why I've kind of put it in this area. I might later show this whole thing again, but right now I just want to say the question is, how will Russia then hit Kemalist Turkey? Will the NATO defense pact cover direct military aid? The answer is again given by Father John, who predicts that there will then be a great destruction of America. And so he won't be able to intervene and help the Turks for a long time. And so there will be a great disaster in America. He has emphasized many times that before we take the city, that would be the Greeks take the city, America will suffer a very big disaster, which explains why Russia will invade Turkey undisturbed by NATO, literally sweeping it until it reaches outside Jerusalem and even as far as Mount Tabor, as revealed by Saint Philomenos. I just told you about him yesterday. There are, in fact, 3 relevant testimonies as recorded in the book. So, let me go here. I think there's one other part on this. I'm trying to recall where that was. Okay. There are other prophecies about America's impending doom. The San Andreas seismic fault in California at the time these lines are being written. American publications are expressing fears of an imminent seismic outbreak in the well-known San Andreas Fault in California, which in 1906 had produced 7.8 Richter, according to others 8.3 Richter. Although they don't use the Richter anymore, they have a more precise and more accurate measurement nowadays. Leveling San Francisco while in the same area also dominates the flagship of Americas. Of course, they're talking about Hollywood. So, he too brings up this catastrophe that's supposed to hit America. And I'm going to go to this newer video that I saw the other day. And they're talking about the Yellowstone volcano, super volcano. Now, we don't know if this will happen either. You know, this is all being said. We don't know. But we're going to go through this for just a minute. In January 2021, Elias Kalioris spoke with a revered elder. Among other topics, he asked him about the supervolcano in Yellowstone, USA, a geological colossus larger than the entire island of Crete. The elder responded with solemn concern, "My child, we must all pray fervently for this volcano, very fervently. It has been about 650 years since it last erupted, and a new gigantic eruption could bury many states in America." Leas notes that he had asked this man of God about the same issue approximately 7 to 8 months earlier. At that time, the elder had replied, the triune God is holding it back so that it does not erupt. Adding to these warnings is the prophecy of the Russian elder Ambrose. In the heart of North America, a giant volcano is erupting and causing a terrible state of emergency. The eruption will cause a very strong earthquake, which will damage the nearby nuclear power plant. The water, air, and land will be poisoned. This part I had not heard before. That it's going to strike, it's going to bother or cause the nuclear power plant to ruin, the radiation, all that's going to come up and it's going to bother the air and the land and all that. And now I looked up the nuclear power plants around the United States, and there isn't one actually near the Yellowstone. I mean, there's one in Washington State, and there's others, but they're not that close. So I'm just wondering, what exactly is that? So let's think about what this all means. We don't know. There's a lot of natural disasters, geological. I've heard, metropolitan offices said geological and biological disasters. So, again, we don't know the date. We don't know the time. We know it's sometime in this era when these things are going to take place. Signs that the world war we're in these stages. But we can't give you, we don't know the exact. We'll see what happens. Keep praying that the Lord will lessen this. And so, hopefully, I didn't bore you with all this. I hope you got a lot out of this. Share your thoughts if you like below this video. And thank you so much for watching and for following my channel. Until next time.